There is a county in Texas where you can build a house on raw land. No permit, no inspector, no code enforcement. And when you finish, the county will respond by doing absolutely nothing. Not because they missed it, not because you snuck it past them, but because that is their official documented policy. It's on their website, in their frequently asked questions. In plain English, there is no building permit, building code, or zoning with which you must comply. The building department doesn't call because there is no building department. When you actually read a county website and see it sitting there like it's totally normal, you start looking at the standard American home building process a little differently. Like maybe it didn't have to be this complicated. Maybe waiting 5 weeks for a guy in a high-waist vest and a clipboard to come frown at your framing for 3 minutes, tell you a nail is 2 centimeters off a 1,000-page regulation book, and then slap you with a bill of nearly $2,000, just for the privilege of being inspected all while your project is already driving you into bankruptcy. Faster than a high-stakes divorce, maybe. That's not some universal law of physics. Maybe it's just a choice, and some places quietly made a different one. So that's where we're going, the places that looked at building codes and said, yeah, we're good. And I want to be clear, this isn't a government bad. Freedom, good debate. Some of these counties have fascinating reasons for operating this way. Some of them are just genuinely broke and couldn't hire an inspector if they tried. Some of them have been building like this for so long that a permit feels as foreign as a traffic light. All of them are different stories, and all of them are real. Let's start with money, because that's what actually moves people. Across America, the total damage for building permits and standard inspection fees easily hovers around the $2,000 mark. That is just the baseline tribute you pay to the bureaucracy before and during the build. Then come the inspections, the waiting. And if you're hiring contractors who charge by the day, that waiting carries a brutal price tag. Recent industry data shows that the average cost just to put up a standard single-family home has now soared past the $500,000 threshold, easily pushing $170 or more per square foot. And remember, that's just the average for a standard cookie-cutter house, not a custom dream home with unique architecture. How much of that is the permit and code process? Estimates vary from a painful $15,000 on the low end to a staggering $50,000 or more if you're trying to build something the code wasn't originally written for. And that's the part most people don't think about. The code wasn't written for everything. Earthbag walls, straw, bale, cob, or shipping containers welded together because you have a specific vision for your life in a regulated county. Someone will stop you, not because your structure is unsafe, but because their checklist doesn't have a box for it. A bureaucrat whose entire construction knowledge comes from scrolling an iPad. Checklist will reject your project simply because his system doesn't have a button labeled mud. But in the counties we're talking about today, nobody's checking the boxes. Let's look at Texas first. Texas is the easiest one to explain, and also somehow the most satisfying. In unincorporated Texas, the legal term for not inside city limits counties generally do not have the legal authority to require a standard residential building permit. That's not a loophole someone found on Reddit. That's state law. The Texas Residential Construction Commission, which handled statewide code enforcement, was abolished by the Texas legislature back in 2009 and replaced with a system that lets counties opt in to enforcement if they feel like it. Most rural counties did not feel like it. Bell County has a frequently asked questions section on their website. It says, direct quote from an official county page, "If you are building in the unincorporated areas of the county, there is no building permit, building code, or zoning with which you must comply." Then it explains the one thing you actually do have to deal with: sewage. That's it. The county's entire position is, do whatever you want with your structure, just don't poison the groundwater. Which, if you think about it, is almost a philosophically defensible place to draw the line. The groundwater belongs to everyone. Your roof pitch belongs to you out in West Texas Hudspeth County. Presidio, Brewster. Terralet's the same deal. No active code enforcement and land prices that feel like a massive spreadsheet error, frequently dropping to around $500 to $1,500 an acre. You can easily find a massive 40-acre parcel in Hudspeth County, sitting comfortably in the $20,000 to $30,000 range total. You can essentially buy a massive estate with pocket money, but the price of absolute freedom is a heavy dose of reality. That $25,000 for 40 acres sounds incredible until you pull up the map and realize your nearest grocery store is a 90-minute drive across the desert, and it closes at 6 p.m. just because the owner feels like it. If it's 8 p.m. and you realize you forgot toilet paper, you either learn to compromise with local flora or enjoy a 3-hour round trip for a single roll. Furthermore, if your house catches fire out there, you don't call the fire department. You pull out your phone, open TikTok, and start live streaming a surreal outdoor heating experience, because by the time a fire truck actually locates your nameless GPS coordinates, the ashes will have already cooled down. Remote out there doesn't mean 45 minutes from a Whole Foods. It means you need to know exactly what you are doing before you show up. But if off-grid is the actual goal, there is probably not a cheaper entry point in America. From the sun-baked deserts of Texas, we head straight north into a completely different frozen reality. Montana is built differently, and the reason is almost comical. Technically, the state has statewide building codes on the books. However, residential buildings with fewer than 5 units are completely exempt from state building permits. Even better, state electrical and plumbing permits are entirely optional if you are an owner-builder working on your own home. Most rural counties, here like Lincoln, Sanders, Mineral, Powder River, or Garfield, don't bother maintaining a local enforcement infrastructure. Why? Because Montana is the 4th largest state by area in America, yet it is home to barely 1.1 million people. The financial math of hiring a small army of inspectors to drive hours through the wilderness just to check a single family. Drywall simply doesn't work. So, the code exists in a dusty law book, but in reality, there is absolutely nobody running it out here. Land prices frequently sit comfortably in the $2,000 to $5,000 per acre range, meaning you can easily snatch up a massive 20 to 40-acre parcel for well under the $50,000 mark. But here's the massive catch. Montana winters are not just a vibe. They are a brutal, unforgiving structural hazard. In this frozen wilderness, insulation isn't some trendy aesthetic preference or a green living choice. It is the literal boundary between living through the night and turning into a human popsicle. If you build your house incorrectly out here, the person handing you a penalty won't be a county inspector holding a fine. It will be Mother Nature herself, and she doesn't accept credit cards. Whatever you build, you're going to want to build it perfectly, with or without a bureaucrat holding your hand. And if you think Montana is sparse, welcome to North Dakota. North Dakota also has a statewide code, but they leave it up to local governments to decide whether they actually want to enforce it. Unsurprisingly, a massive string of rural counties steal: Golden Valley, Sheridan, Slope, Oliver, Logan, Towner, Burke, Dickey. Emmons looked at that option and said, "No thanks. These are tiny, isolated communities that simply do not possess the institutional budget or the staff to run a permitting system. The code is on the books, but nobody is running the office." Which raises a cynical question worth sitting with. How much of American building code enforcement is actually about public safety? And how much of it is just about whether a county is wealthy enough to payroll a government office? Because if a safety code is completely optional the moment a county runs out of cash, it's not actually a universal standard. It's just a luxury policy that wealthy suburban counties can afford to run, while small, broke ones simply cannot. Now, let's flip the script and move away from the empty plains into a place where the lack of regulation actually created a booming destination. Missouri has over 110 counties and absolutely no mandatory statewide residential building code. They leave it completely up to local governments, and many outside the major cities simply looked at the paperwork decades ago, tossed it in the trash, and never looked back. Take Shannon County, for example. Example officially confirmed to have 0 building codes. Out here, land prices are highly enticing, often hitting around $4,000 to over $5,000 an acre, allowing you to easily lock down a beautiful 10 to 40 acre plot well within the $15,000 to $40,000 range. Because of this, the Ozark counties, Douglas Ozark, Shannon, Oregon, and the confusingly named Texas County, Missouri have turned into a massive booming hub for alternative builders. We are talking about straw, clay, hempcrete, earth bags, cob, and owner-built everything. There is an entire subculture of people who migrated to rural Missouri specifically because the building code didn't exist, giving them the freedom to build architectural masterpieces that wouldn't survive a single afternoon in a regulated county. And let's be honest about why. It's not because these structures are dangerous. Cob houses have been standing solid in Missouri for decades. It's because a typical suburban guy whose entire construction knowledge comes from scrolling an iPad checklist will look at a beautifully sculpted mud wall like it's a UFO. He is going to have an absolute panic attack trying to approve it on a Wednesday afternoon. And trying to apply for a variance code is its own special nightmare. Online forums for alternative builders have been pointing to Missouri for over 15 years. As one user bluntly summarized back then, and it still applies today, satisfy them on the septic issue and build whatever you want. Today, a massive informal infrastructure has formed out there. People are teaching each other, building together, and putting up rock-solid structures on the Ozark hillsides without a single official inspection ever taking place. It is a community built entirely around an absence of government. But if you want a system that is actively, geniusly cham-bim, you have to look at Arizona. Arizona features a hybrid setup in Cochise County that created what has been called America's most lenient owner-builder system, specifically their option to amendment. Cochise County doesn't claim to have no codes. Instead, they created a very businesslike transaction. You pay the county a permit fee, you get the paperwork, and then you build your house with absolutely zero inspections. The only required visit is a final one, just so the county can update its tax records. Think about the beautiful irony of this. You are literally paying the government for the explicit permission to be completely unsupervised. You get the official permit which you desperately need for insurance, resale value, and future bank conversations. But the exhausting, agonizing inspections that normally come attached to it simply vanish. It is a brilliant, capitalistic compromise. You hand over the cash, and the county promises to stay completely out of your way. But before you pack your bags, sell your current life and buy a one-way ticket to a code-free paradise. We need to talk about the gray zones, because in some places, no codes is not a philosophize, a trap. Let's start with West Virginia. On paper, West Virginia adopted the strict International Building Code. All 55 of its counties technically did. But here's the catch. Out of those 55 counties, barely 10 actually have a functioning code enforcement office. The other 45 counties operate on a system that is almost laughably passive. If you walk into their office, they will politely suggest that you pull a permit, mostly just so they can check a map and ensure you aren't accidentally building your living room in a literal floodplain. Once that brief conversation is over, they are completely done with you. They have absolutely no budget for inspectors, meaning the code passed, but nobody is actually running the enforcement. It sounds amazing, right? But remember, when a local government says, "We have laws, but we are too broke to enforce them," the practical effect means you are 100% on your own. If a flash flood sweeps your newly built cabin down the mountain because nobody checked the soil stability, the county won't offer sympathy. They will just remind you that you signed up for the unsupervised package. And if you think West Virginia is a wild gamble, welcome to Colorado, the ultimate cautionary tale of how fast the rug can be pulled from under your feet for years. Colorado was the holy grail in alternative building circles. The state has no mandatory statewide residential building code, and several counties decided not to bother with enforcement. Places like Delta, Montezuma, Mineral, Sedgwick, Baca, and especially Saguache County in the San Luis Valley became legendary. Saguache is a high desert landscape so hauntingly beautiful and isolated that people will literally drive 14 hours and then cry when they see it. It developed one of the highest concentrations of off-grid owner-built structures in America. Ships rammed earth and solar-powered everything. The community thrived because nothing was stopping them. But then, look at what happened in neighboring Costilla County. This is the ultimate wake-up call for anyone romanticizing the off-grid lifestyle. Costilla County used to be on everyone's shortlist. Rural, breathtaking, cheap, and completely code-free. Thousands of people bought raw land there with one specific set of expectations: to be left alone. Then, the county government suddenly cracked down. Out of nowhere, they banned camping on your own private land for more than 2 weeks, unless you could demonstrate significant expensive construction progress. People who had spent their life savings on a piece of dirt suddenly found themselves trapped in a completely different regulatory nightmare. The land didn't change, but the politics did. To make matters worse, the state government stepped in, passing heavy legislative pressure on remaining code-free counties to adopt modern regulations, while Delta and Montezuma counties are still holding out as no-code zones in recent reports. The undeniable trend in Colorado is shifting heavily toward more enforcement, not less, if you are making a massive financial decision based on a county's current regulatory status. You need to verify it directly with the clerk's office, not from some old internet forum or a YouTube video, including this one, because the county that has never had an inspector on payroll can easily hire an aggressive one next fiscal year. And as one devastated landowner who went through a sudden enforcement shift bluntly put it, you never know when a jurisdiction will suddenly change its mind, slap you with hefty fines, or worse, bring a bulldozer to demolish the home you've built with your own two hands. Before we dive into the final reality check, a quick legal disclaimer. The information provided in this video is for educational, entertainment, and informational purposes only. Regulatory policies, zoning laws, and county enforcement can change rapidly. Do not buy land or start construction based solely on this video. Always directly contact the local county authorities to verify current laws before making any financial investments. Now, let's talk about the cold, hard truths that those clickbait thumbnails always forget to mention. Because even in the most lawless, code-free corners of America, there are two monolithic entities that you can never outrun: the environment and the banking system. First up, the sewage. You can proudly declare to the world that you are a sovereign rebel, a civil libertarian who bows to no building department. You can build a 3-story fortress out of empty beer cans, old tires, and pure imagination in rural Missouri. And absolutely nobody from the county will show up to stop you. But do not mess with your toilet. You can challenge the U.S. Constitution all you want, but you cannot challenge the Environmental Protection Agency when it comes to human waste. Regardless of how little a county cares about your ceiling heights, your wall materials, or which way your front door swings. Every single state cares deeply about where your sewage goes. The moment you let waste leak into a shared creek or poison the local water table, a completely different agency will swarm your land with a ruthless, aggressive energy that makes a SWAT team look polite. Horta, the ultimate boundary of freedom in America, does not depend on the pitch of your roof. It depends entirely on whether your septic tank leaks. If you satisfy them on the septic issue, you can build your palace. Fail that one universal rule, and you are finished. Then there is the brutal reality of financing. If you think you're going to walk into a mainstream bank, shake hands with a loan officer, and secure a conventional mortgage or a construction loan for a house in a no-code county, prepare to watch that lender walk out of the room laughing. No permit means no official record. No record means no legal documentation of what was built, how it was built, or if it will collapse in a light breeze. To a bank, your off-grid dream home isn't an asset, it's a massive financial liability. This complication matters less if you are paying entirely in cash. And granted, cash is a lot more accessible when a massive 40-acre piece of land costs you a modest $25,000 instead of a crippling $250,000. That is precisely why this extreme lifestyle works so well for the specific group of people it works for. But if a bank loan is an essential part of your master plan, you need to look into this brick wall before you buy the dirt. The irony of all this is that the history of American building codes is far weirder than most people expect. When a rural county refuses to adopt a modern building code, they aren't trying to make a radical, anti-government, anarchist statement. They just predate the modern corporate system and never found a logical reason to join it. Building regulations in America actually date back to 1625, starting as basic fire safety rules in early colonial settlements. Boston outlawed wooden chimneys as early as 1630. Even George Washington recommended height limits on wood frame buildings in his early plans for the District of Columbia, though he framed it as a polite suggestion because that's how things worked back then. The exhausting, heavily bureaucratized system we think of as normal today is actually brand new. The International Code Council wasn't even formed until 1994, in the very first International Residential Code, massive baseline document that modern cities now used to terrorize owner-builders, published until the year 2000. So, when Shanna County, Missouri, tells you they don't have a building code, it's not a political rebellion. It's just pure, beautiful inertia. They existed long before the year 2000. They built solid homes that lasted for generations, and they simply chose to ignore the modern trend. On a side note, Chicago still aggressively runs its own proprietary municipal code, the only major city in America to do so. They looked at the national standard, said no thank you, and kept doing their own thing, which is simultaneously infuriating and deeply impressive. Classic Chicago. The counties that let you build without a permission slip aren't lawless badlands populated by outlaws. They are just operating on a traditional historical idea of what local government is supposed to do. In their eyes, the land is yours, the house is yours. And as long as you don't create a shared problem like ruining the shared groundwater, blocking a floodplain, or running an illegal commercial factory, they are going to leave you completely alone. That is not a radical concept. That is exactly how the vast majority of rural America operated for most of its history. The endless permitting system that feels mandatory and inevitable in a modern suburb is newer than people realize, more optional than people assume, and geographically patchier than any map can show you. There are still hundreds of rural counties where the grueling process that bankrupts everyday families in the city simply does not exist. Not because those places are broken, poor, or left behind, because they made a different call, or better yet, they never made the call at all. And either way, they are still out there right now, waiting with cheap land and absolutely no building inspectors on the county payroll. But remember, that regulatory window is closing fast. What is code-free today might look entirely different in 5 years. So if this path matters to your future, do not rely on a forum post. Pick up the phone, call the county clerk directly, and ask them a single, unmistakable question. What permits do you require for residential construction in unincorporated areas? Listen closely to the answer. And if the voice on the other end tells you some version of, "We don't really do that here. You didn't stumble into a loophole," you just found a rare piece of America that still believes the land belongs to the person who bought it. But before you go and make that call, I want to hear from you. Would you actually dare to build your dream home completely unsupervised? Or does the total lack of safety checklists terrify you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into America's hidden pockets of freedom, hit that like button and subscribe so you won't miss our next adventure. What you do with that absolute freedom is entirely up to you.